So let's have you guys introduce yourselves. Let's start right here. Randy.
Hi, my name is Randy Bias, CEO of Cloud Scaling. Cloud Scaling is the #1 independent cloud services engineering firm in the world. We help mostly telcos and service providers and also some global SIs and governments build public and private clouds, mostly focused on the infrastructure side, but the whole extended team has a lot of experience in infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. We've been involved with EC2, GoGrid, EngineYard, SunCloud, and a number of other large-scale clouds. And so we're highly opinionated, or I'm highly opinionated, I should say, about how infrastructure and platform interact. I think that's really important. I think it's very much overlooked. There's a tendency to believe that platforms can treat infrastructure as sort of opaque black boxes, and I don't think that that's true at all. And we'll get into it later.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that. He is indeed opinionated. Eric.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Totome. I work for Google. I'm a product management director there. I look after our developer products. This includes a bunch of different things like Google App Engine, Google Web Toolkit, and a number of APIs and other things. And App Engine, I'm sure you know, or I hope you know, is our platform as a service offering.
And Chris?
So hi, I'm Chris Swan. I'm CTO at Capital SCF. We're a London-based corporate finance firm specializing in tech. We work with SIs, telcos, and software companies, advising them on their strategy, leading into M&A. Before joining Capital SCF, I was an IT guy at an investment bank for 10 years, building internal application platforms and utilities and grids and that kind of stuff.
Cool, thanks. And Jesper?
My name is Jesper Jørgensen. I'm one of several product managers at Salesforce.com working on the platform product. Hopefully most of you know Salesforce.com. We started a little over 10 years ago building out software as a service. We have a big CRM application that runs in the cloud. And a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, we really started to factor out a platform underneath that SaaS application. We call that the Force.com platform. We build out the capability for you to build any application on top of Salesforce. And most recently, we launched an initiative together with VMware called VMforce, where we're taking that platform down the Java path together with VMforce. So that's one of the things I'm specifically working on, and I'm pretty excited to be here today.
Cool. Great. Thanks, Jesper. Okay, so we'll get into the conversation momentarily. First, I want you all to read every single word of this and put your hands up when you're done. Thank you very much. Wow, some of you are fast readers. And I wanted to just spend a little bit of time setting the scene. Okay, so this is our exposition, I guess. Where the dollars spent. This is a highly scientific survey, which I can't back up at all. Of where the money is spent. Infrastructure maintenance is a big chunk of it, and Eric's going to beat me up about that in a minute. But and on the application side, though, there's really a lot of money being spent over there too. And of course, a lot of the focus these days is on the infrastructure side, from my own glorious company as well as many others. But the application side also needs some attention. And so, while the numbers are probably inaccurate to some extent, one way or the other, the point of the slide is application maintenance is a really big deal. We need to worry about that side of the application software side of the spending equation. How are we going to deal with that as well? All right, and so what Platform as a Service is about is trying to address the application side of IT investment, just as we're also doing on the infrastructure side of things. So what is Platform as a Service? This is another highly scientific slide. This is Killian's version of what a classic web application looks like. Lots of grunge around the edges in the middle, and then there's a couple of important boxes on this. One of them is the incoming web request, which hopefully is how the money bit works. That's how the salaries are paid. But the other bit is the red box, application software, right? That's the bit that actually makes your company interesting to people, right? Or whatever application it is you're delivering in IT or whatever. So what Platform as a Service is about is letting application developers focus on that red box. And the Platform as a Service side of things generally deals with all the infrastructure around it, right? Whether that's hardware infrastructure, application infrastructure, and so on. So the idea is to allow people to focus on writing their application. Of course, there are subtleties in this. Different people can disagree. Even intelligent people sometimes disagree with me on this, I've found. But that's the general idea. Okay, so with that, the scene is set. So that you know who's talking, I'll leave that up there during our conversation. And I'll turn to Eric first. So, Eric, why would anyone want to adopt a platform as a service? What's their opportunity?
So I think you've captured it really well with your very scientific diagram. I think in most cases we see a lot of our customers adopt a platform because they want to spend most or all of their energy on that application layer where they know the business, where they're focused. And by and large, that's what we see platform as a service providing, is abstracting a lot of the lower levels of the infrastructure so that whenever that platform fits your needs, and obviously platforms today are growing to fit more and more different types of needs, you find yourself just not having to worry about a lot of the lower levels of the stack. Just to give you some more concrete examples, if you're building an application that, I guess the most canonical example of the value of this is if you build an app that actually is going to need to scale to something a little bigger than what you'd run on a typical VM or machine. As soon as you build this at a low level, you have to worry about load balancing and how you're going to spin up the multiple places where this runs and all of this. And if you do it at the platform as a service level, all of this is taken care of for yourself by the platform. So you don't have to worry about how you optimize, say, load balancing, for instance. And I will be the first to say that there's cases where you really want to tune these things, and that's when you don't necessarily want to be at the platform level. But in many, many cases, whether they're internal use cases or external websites or anything in between, you're just better off not having to worry about this. Just to try and make it maybe more concrete in a different way, assume you're building an application that needs to send and receive chat messages, and typically that's done with XMPP today. You can spend 2 weeks or whatever time it's going to take you to actually build an interface with that XMPP gateway, and then you'll have to maintain it for the rest of your life. Or you can just rely on a service that will provide XMPP services to you in the underlying infrastructure and just have a very simple API that you can call and rely on. So again, that's a matter of where you want to focus your time and attention, both in terms of when you actually build the application, but also once you actually deploy and run it. The deployment on the platform is a push of a button. Everything else is taken care of for you. The maintenance is pretty much non-existent, or it'll be focused on that part of the pie that was the application itself. Of course, applications will continue to throw errors and have problems. That's where your business logic and value resides. But everything else, maybe you don't actually need to worry so much about it. And that's what I see being the key value of why we see people adopting a platform.
Cool. So it sounds like motherhood and apple pie, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is it just that straight walk in the park? Anyone else got any experience around? Yeah, Randy, go ahead.
Actually, I had a question.
Yeah.
So the example you gave was interesting because you were talking about XMPP gateways, but it just immediately jumped in my head. That sounded like a separate application that's providing a service where you're hooking up two separate applications that are talking in sort of a service-oriented architecture. And how do you what's the difference between platform as a service and a service-oriented architecture with a bunch of decoupled applications, and why is it more interesting than SOA in a way? I mean, I guess I'll put forth before you answer that an assertion, which is that I think that it's because it allows the developers to self-service without having to think about all the bits.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, you've just asked the question and answered it as well. I mean, I just think you're so much more, on top of the whole stack, and you can just use and take advantage of it and not have to worry about the different bits.
Yes, Spring?
Yeah, I think it's interesting you bring up the difference or combination of service-oriented architecture with platform as a service. When Eric was talking through some of the advantages that you get out of platform as a service, I think you mentioned one part of the advantages and value that you can get out of it. One of the things we're seeing what's my experience from Salesforce is that given they're a platform as a service, we now have the ability to much more cost effectively deliver another layer of services to customers. Application services could be things like search indexing, which you guys are doing as well. It is, in our case, things like plain database management, or even high-level services like mobile services, or we have reporting, dashboards, things that you have a really hard time yourself building out as a service-oriented architecture. If you sit alone in your own enterprise at home, you may try, but experience has shown that it's really hard to succeed on that. But when we do it at a greater scale, we can really build some useful services for people and drive down cost.
Cool.
Thanks.
Chris, you did a bunch of platform stuff in an enterprise.
And I think back to Randy's point, some of this stuff's been knocking around for a little while here. So we've had SOA and we've created compute utilities within enterprises. And that allowed, at the time, application developers to get going with things much quicker than they otherwise would have done. But I think one of the things that's changing here is, we saw the emergence of the enterprise service bus as part of that SOA movement. And the whole point of the ESB was kind of dragging data from one place to the next so that you could do something meaningful with it. And we're seeing a reversal of that, I think, with PaaS. So instead of dragging the data to the application, we're now taking the full application stack and shrink wrapping it and taking it to the data. So if you've already got your CRM data in the Esper's platform, or you've already got your stuff over in Google Apps platform, then nowadays you can take your application code and put it to where your data already sits. And that's making you much more productive straight away.
There was something interesting at one of the larger Ruby on Rails platform as a service providers that was a client early on. And they went and they surveyed their customers and they said, why are you with us? And even though this business was deep into Rails and was deep into Ruby and was contributing lots to open source, it wasn't their expertise on Ruby on Rails. It was because they got a managed database. Almost every customer wanted their database to simply be an SQL interface that they would talk to, and they didn't have to know what was on the other side of that. So I don't know how much that's helping to drive adoption as well, but it seems like a key use case that developers don't want to know what's behind the curtain.
Interesting. Yeah, Jesper, good.
Well, that was basically what happened at Salesforce, right? We realized we built a CRM application, but as we built it, we ended up building a scalable, general-purpose relational database underneath, and that's what our customers are taking advantage of now, building all sorts of other applications on top of it. And that's really where there's a huge portion of the value they get out of it, is that all they need to do is define the scheme and store their data, and the service takes care of the rest.
Chris, I remember clustering and things like that being excruciatingly painful in my enterprise. What about yours?
Well, in my firm, we don't even have any servers, so I don't have to worry about the pains of clustering or anything anymore. Right. We're a pure SaaS company, and I think I'm seeing a trend out there that if you're starting a firm today, you'd have to be a lunatic not to be pure SaaS. And I also talk about vanilla being the new black, that we see large enterprise companies now adopting commodity services rather than having something that's highly customized. But then you've got to think about that differentiation between what you can use as a commodity and what's adding value to your business. And when you do need to build that specialist application that's genuinely adding value to your business, then you want something that's going to get you close to the data that you've already got. And that's what PaaS, alongside of existing SaaS applications, is giving to folk.
Okay. Eric, is that your...
I agree. I mean, I think, first of all, I agree with what you've been saying about how data is becoming more central. Yeah. And if you can actually have all your services gravitating around your data, this becomes hugely powerful.
So who shouldn't adopt it, right? I mean, this is all a lovely, rosy picture, but...
So I predicting 10 years next what will be, we can try, but I think we're going to see the classic adoption where we are seeing places where this is adopted really, really fast. I think particularly mostly the external, the ISV, the SaaS vendors are jumping on this faster than for internal use cases. But we're also seeing internal use cases starting to grow. I think it's a matter of time, and it starts. If you look at any, just thinking about the internal use case for a sec, every single CIO has depending on the size of the company, 10, hundreds, or thousands of apps actually. And there's a pyramid here with some tiering, and they typically don't start with their most mission-critical, cash register-related app. They start with the lower tiers, or they use this to actually add a new front end to an existing application. So it's a matter of maturity, but I think it's only a matter of time that for the vast majority of what you're trying to build, you really don't need to go any lower than that sort of level, and you're quite happy to just stay. Just like if you think about, you can still try and manage your own memory when you write C, but most people are quite happy to use higher level libraries. It's the same thing. I think people are just going to move up the stack.
But something to bear in mind here is that enterprises are hugely complex, and they've got a lot of disentanglement to do before they can clean up data in a way that supports the kind of models that we're talking about here. But what we can do now is have the enterprise put their toe in the water. So the PaaS platforms that we're seeing emerge now give you something where you can put your toe in the water and use it internally, pure private cloud, and just become part of the ecosystem, whilst at the same time kind of develop a direction towards something that's much more public cloudy, and there's all of the hybrid options along the way.
Okay. So Jesper, let's talk a little bit about in that adoption, right? When people actually go and start adopting it, who are the stakeholders in this, right? Who are the different people we're talking about?
We're all still here, right? It's
right.
In many ways it's the same people. If you look across the ecosystem, you have technology vendors, you have the enterprises that are consuming technology. Within those enterprises, you have the IT department that's responsible for managing it, acquiring it. And you have the end users, and then you have an ISV ecosystem on top of the core technology providers. So that hasn't changed much. I think aside of just the pure question of stakeholders, it's important to keep in mind that I think two things are happening at the same time here. We're moving towards cloud computing. We're doing infrastructure as a service and now platform as a service on one side. On the other side, we're continuing a struggle that a cause that we've been on for decades, which is to make IT and make technology a better servant of people and users, right? So we're continuing to try to close the gap between the end users, the business users, in this case, who are going to use the software and who have requirements, and the developers who can build custom applications inside a single enterprise, the ISVs who build general purpose applications, and the platform vendors that provide sort of the underlying infrastructure. And I think there are some changes there, and I like the way you put it, saying that SaaS and PaaS are important together because vanilla is the new black. So this move towards consolidated, scalable service providers from a technology perspective has made it much more interesting, or there's much more value today in go and pick a vanilla service for a customer for a given application, like take Salesforce.com CRM app, right? If you go and adopt that and don't change it at all, you have very little work to do. But then when you do want to make changes, you want to have your technology provider who's providing that application also provide platform as a service option that's integrated into it so that you can build out custom functionality. And in terms of stakeholders, what we're seeing there is that I think more so than with traditional application development, we're seeing business users having a stronger influence and more drive. They're able to go out into a market of SaaS applications and buy one and start using it and then come to IT afterwards. That was harder in the past, even though it happened in the past as well that line of business goes out and they buy an application. They need to get that application installed. It's really hard for them to sort of get around IT. Now, a line of business can go in and say, "Oh, we just started using it. We didn't really tell you about it, and it's working great for us. Now we want to expand usage within the enterprise." Our CEO, our CFO likes this idea. They want to spread it to other divisions. They want IT on board, and then IT comes into the picture. So I think PaaS and SaaS and cloud computing is helping to put a little bit more power back into business users. Well, we've seen this particularly with small enterprises and with small divisions or small groups of in large enterprises, and we've seen them get pretty far this way. But I think we're now at a crossroads where there's enough momentum that this really is the way forward. As basically you've been saying here, it's motherhood and apple pie, right? There's really no reason not to adopt cloud computing, and this is the point where we need to have the real conversations with enterprise IT and need to bring them back in and make sure that what we build is something that works for them. And they have a whole other set of requirements that we have to take into consideration. So I think that's sort of the timeline that we've seen. Focus on front-end, simple, vanilla, powerful end-user functionality first and drive adoption. And then now build a solid infrastructure, build out features and functionality for enterprise IT that helps them spread adoption across more than one department. And those are things like identity integration, general integration, auditing, security. Those types of entities or services play a much stronger role now in a PaaS platform than what they did a few years ago. So that's sort of within the company. And then, of course, you have the ISV community on top of that. And I think everyone who wants to be serious in this technology space will need to figure out how to bring in, how to create a marketplace for their infrastructure and how to bring these ISV applications to end customers. There's a whole separate set of problems to solve there. And if you look across the ecosystem of the market out there right now, you'll see that pretty much everyone is trying to address that problem as well.
Okay, cool. Anyone else?
In terms of the stakeholders, I think the key stakeholder here is actually the developer.
Yeah.
So I sometimes talk about SaaS being for the end user and PaaS being for the developer. And Jesper touched upon a couple of points there, but I think there's two sort of key constituencies of developers involved here. So if you are an enterprise and you've got internal developers, then they're important, and PaaS needs to embrace them. And I think that's actually what's changed in the last year or so. If you wanted to use Force.com a year ago, Salesforce had a PaaS offering, but you had to go and learn a different programming language. And the same kind of thing applied to Google App Engine. There's not a great deal of Python programmers in the enterprise, but enterprises are chock full of Java and .NET guys. And so if you give them something that they already know, then you've got their engagement. The number of projects that I saw where they started out from possibly fundamentally the wrong place because it was kind of, well, we've got a bunch of C++ guys, and therefore the answer is to write this in C++, not, this is the problem, what's the best way of addressing it? But that's just how enterprises work, and nobody's going to change that overnight. So if you take a platform that actually embraces most of what the enterprise developers can do, then you're off to the right start. Now, the other key constituency there are the developers within the ISVs, and I think the exciting possibility that's coming here now is companies that would never have been able to have custom software in the past are going to be able to go to ISVs and have it delivered on PaaS alongside of the SaaS applications that they've already adopted. And that's pretty powerful. So it's going to sort of democratize custom application. And as we see this commoditization trend of cloud computing putting money back on the table, and that money can be spent on innovation that's adopted in this mechanism of getting the customized software that's really adding value to the business rather than just customizing stuff because you can.
Right.
So I have a similar view, but it's a little bit simplified. I think there's really two key stakeholders. It's the developers, and then it's centralized IT. And when you break it down like that, and you really think, in my mind, what cloud computing is about, it's about low friction or no friction IT services. And the question is, how can enterprise IT allow developers to have that same kind of low friction experience that they have outside the enterprise today? I mean, if you go home right now and you log into your Gmail account, you have one, you've got 7 gigs of space and it keeps ticking up, right? And if you want to turn on Google Apps for a domain, it costs you a credit card and 5 minutes of your time, and you're up and running. inside the enterprise, the friction is much higher. There's a lot more bars to jump over as a developer. You get use cases where folks at for example, a large retail company went outside of core enterprise IT and started using an external platform as a service system and started driving 25% additional revenue at checkout through their portal. Real story. And they could do that because they went around centralized IT. So for centralized IT, it's sort of an existential question. How do you have a set of services, a portfolio of services internally that have that same kind of feeling and value proposition that a lot of these, cloud computing pioneers like Salesforce and Google bring to the table outside the firewall? And I just don't think we're there yet. I mean, you've got really infrastructure guys who think only about server storage and networking, and you've got developers who really think only about their code, and there's not much of a meet in the middle. And where the meet in the middle needs to happen is building the infrastructure as a service that's self-service and low friction, and then having multiple platform as a service options on top of that actually know how to talk to the infrastructure and provide that kind of experience to a developer. And it's pretty early days. I don't think we're anywhere close to getting something really functional yet.
Right.
But so I just want to make sure I get your point right. For me, they're orthogonal, right? There's the fact that IT tends to things come through the windows before they come through the main door, right? And so IT often becomes the main door and takes time to adopt the new technologies. But at the same time, I don't necessarily feel that IT has to offer an internal solution. It's a lot of what you talked about, which we're focused on as well, is making sure that IT departments now feel comfortable with PaaS and public clouds as a first-class citizen in the portfolio of solutions they can offer to their developers, to their lines of businesses as ways to build their apps and all the apps they need.
Totally agree. Right. So it's gonna be some combination of internal and external. Right. But the reality is that most folks want to err on the side of internal in the short term, I think.
Why?
Fear.
Of what?
Fear, control, need for security, ability to get through compliance.
How do you start? He mentioned a question of
PaaS is locking. The data store that you have is completely different than the data store that you have, which is completely different data store than your house. Right? That's a loss of control. That doesn't give my company the flexibility to make decisions.
So let's talk about it. Yeah. So Jens is saying PaaS is a lock-in, right? What do you guys think about that?
Well, so there's a couple of things. First, we actually announced all together back in May an initiative called Cloud Portability, VMware.com/Cloud Portability, which was aimed at saying that if you build with Spring, that was the framework we chose at the time, you'll be able to roll out your app in VMforce, in Google App Engine, on-premise. So I think, I realize what you're saying, but I think we know that the one thing we want to do is avoid that this be a blocker.
Did you plant that guy? Or?
No.
You work for Google? No.
But I think often in these things, you just get to choose your flavor of lock-in. Lock-in's unavoidable. Yeah, apart from really trivial use cases, and the one I talk about is email, then you don't have the open data standards and you don't have the open APIs to be able to move between service providers. So we're talking about moving the application to the data. If you've already put your data into Salesforce, you've chosen that lock-in already.
So let's talk about that a bit more, right? So let's talk about the integration thing, data integration, Chris. Just, okay, so we're going to use a PaaS. We've got, all this stuff, right? We're an enterprise or something like that, right? How do we work with it?
So, we're talking about the data piece being important and the database being the foundation of the lock-in. So, you're either inside the wall at the moment and you've chosen to buy an enterprise CRM product. And let's just concentrate on CRM at the moment because it's kind of the guys next door. Then, you've chosen an enterprise CRM product, you've chosen your lock-in. And then maybe one day you've done a merger with another company and you've discovered that rather than one CRM product, you've got like 8. And you want to try and bring it all together. Now, you can choose your lock-in again. You choose which one of those 8 you want to stick with. Or you kind of go, oh man, this is just far too complicated. It's actually going to be easier for me to drag the whole lot into a SaaS platform. And you choose which SaaS platform you drag it into. You've chosen your lock-in again. Now, what nobody's doing at the moment is kind of saying, okay, we're going to figure out for the entire industry what a standard schema for CRM data looks like and what the API to move that data across would look like, because you can't herd those cats, and that's kind of why you're stuck with the lock-in. Now, from an integration perspective, you go through these nightmare programs of finding that data and going through those migrations and kind of dragging it and beating it into the schema of choice, the one that you've chosen to lock yourself into. And you put in, for that time being, integration middleware to pull it out of one API and stuff it into another. And you lose things and you end up with duplicates and you have pain. But once you've got over that pain, then you want to have as much convenience as possible in how you work with that data afterwards. And I think that's kind of what's happening here.
Yeah, I want to caveat it the same way that Chris did, saying there's always lock-in. I think that's important to just acknowledge. And I think you need to look at what's happening in PaaS relative to how things were before. It was a different kind of lock-in, but you still had lock-in. At the same time, I think the standards evolution hasn't stopped, right? PaaS doesn't change that. So what Chris is mentioning here too is within PaaS, we're working on what kind of data interchange format should we have? And you start with the ones that we share the most. So, collaborative formats for contact information, for example, portable contacts that Google has been working on, calendaring, emails, and so on and so forth. Accounts and contacts is something that we'll always be involved in from a CRM perspective. So that's happening. We started out by sort of a layer below that and said, let's have a standard API. So it's a SOAP API. Yes, the data format is not standard. And in fact, since you can customize it any way you want, there's no way we can make it standard. But we have given you a standard API that any technologist can go out and build a solution for. And I think there you're going to see benefits in PaaS, SaaS, and cloud computing land, because more and more enterprises are going to be using a few sets of technologies that are very open and where it's very, very hard to hide that there are no way of getting data in and out of them. If there's no way for you to get data in and out of Salesforce, it'll be all over the web. Like it's easier to expose us as being proprietary than it is to expose some small software vendor that you have, whose software you have installed and you've stored data inside it. So I think we're under a lot more scrutiny right now, and I think those who will be successful in the SaaS and PaaS space long term are the ones who understand that customers care about that. And I'm going to get on a call next week, I think, with one of our customers where this is the specific topic. This is, if I build an app on you, how do I move it away? And the work that Google, VMware, and ourselves are doing right now around VM-Force and Spring is at the core of that. But it doesn't solve all your problems magically for you. Login is a fact. The moment you build something, you're going to put some effort into unbuilding it or building it somewhere else. It's just a matter of how big is that effort, I think.
Randy, you're Mr. OpenStack, so, we just... do we lock in and all that kind of stuff? I mean, is it relevant higher up the stack?
It's more relevant the higher up the stack you go.
Yeah.
So the closer you are to software or applications, the more lock-in they're in. As the further you go down towards infrastructure, the less there is. John's got a valid concern and question around lock-in. I mean, it's important. It needs to be one of the criteria that you use as a risk when you try to decide whether you want to use something. But there's lock-in in a lot of different ways, and one of the things about lock-in in the case of platforms and software is it creates a whole ecosystem of folks who help get around that lock-in. We changed our domain name on Google Apps, and I needed to move it from one Google Apps account to another, and there were specialist companies out there that knew how to write tooling that would extract all the data out through the APIs and push it back into the new account.
Exactly. So we're with the whole integration thing, right? If there's an adequate ecosystem of integration tools or partners or something else, aren't we good? Eric, sounds like you guys have one.
I just think, there's always a bit of locking. It's the nature. This is capitalism, right? I mean, everyone's trying to build foundations that eventually are pervasive, but fundamentally one's got to differentiate. But if you look back 10, 20 years ago where lock-in was like massive, I just think that using a lot of these open source technologies, a lot of these open protocols, and again, through the efforts, I don't want to pitch for what we all did together, but I think it's pretty cool, actually. Things like cloud portability. There will always be a bit of locking, but I think we as an industry, the computer science industry, if you wish, we are a lot better off than a few years ago, or on technologies that are actually being still used, and at large right now.
Right. Yeah. No, it does seem to me that if you have the right integration points, right, you can hit most of the pieces, right? But there's some things like data that needs to stay behind the firewall and all those kind of things, or maybe directories, user directories or something like that. How do we deal with that stuff that kind of probably needs to live behind the firewall, but maybe bits of it need to pull out and stuff like that? Is there tools for that kind of thing?
So, yeah, I'll take the question on identity.
Mm-hmm.
Federated identity's been out there for best part of a decade now. And it seems that until very recently, although there were lots of use cases for it, people just didn't understand how to use it in a meaningful manner. And there's a lot of enterprises still don't have any federated identity platform to leverage. But I remember thinking when I was working in an enterprise situation that this was one of the first things that we needed to get sorted, because we were just getting on top of deprovisioning people from their applications when they left the firm. And then along came Salesforce. And the Salesforce guys were really friendly. When I called them up, they told me that there were 152 people at the bank where I worked that were using Salesforce, and they were paying for it with their credit cards. And I thought the typical IT reaction to this would be, how do I stop this from happening? And my own reaction was, these guys obviously think that they're getting value out of this, so how do I help them do that? And yet still give the controls that the enterprise
That's why you
wants.
don't work there anymore, right? Yeah.
Maybe that's why I don't work there anymore. But the obvious answer to that was, if those accounts were somehow keyed into the company's directory through a federation platform, then on the day that those guys left, I wouldn't have to worry, do they still have access to the data that was out in the cloud when I've turned off their data access from behind the firewall. And it wasn't just about that piece of control as well, it was about convenience. So it was, why do people want to have to remember a different password for everything that they're using when what they actually want to do is just come and sign in and get on with being productive?
With their Facebook account, right? Yeah.
Well, and why not?
Jesper, you're nodding sagely. You guys have had to do a lot of this kind of thing, I guess, right?
How many have more than one Salesforce login here?
So, I think that speaks a lot to where the centralized IT needs to evolve, right? You have to move away from managing specific technology and point solutions into managing this sort of ecosystem of solutions, some outside the firewall and some inside, where you're actually measuring risk and you're measuring ROI and you're working to actually build all of the value chains around IT services and how your enterprise derives value from them. Because right now, a lot of the time the data center appears as just a black box. Some dollars go on one side, some value comes out the other side, and it's not really clear what was attached to what. And I think that's a little bit of a mind shift that's not quite there yet.
I want to go back and maybe repose the question that Killian's basically trying to ask, if we can solve the integration problem, isn't the whole cloud problem solved? So, when we have time for some Q&A, I think it would be interesting to get people's take on that, whether that is really the only problem. We definitely work with our customers and see many different cases and scenarios of a customer saying, like having a reason for why they cannot move data to the cloud. So there's the integration problem, right? Like when you can't move it to the cloud, how do you integrate? And I think we're making pretty good progress on that. As always with integration problems, the mother of all integration problems is identity. So that's where we start. And I think we made a lot of progress on that. Again, as an industry, not just Salesforce, we've gradually implemented SAML, federated sign-on. We worked in a standards effort with Google and other companies actually to take OAuth and move it to OAuth 2 and integrate it to SAML. And I think it's kind of been riding nicely on the wave of enterprises moving to SAML and federated integration. That has been something that's been going on for some time, and I think we're beginning to see some good success stories there now. So once we solve the integration problem, the identity problem, think a lot of the integration problems are somewhat trivial. There are still security concerns. How do you transport data from behind your firewall and out and the other way? But maybe the last problem after that is really the hard one, which is, are there data that you're not comfortable moving or you can't move for regulatory reasons or other reasons that can't really be solved easily with technology? So, it'd be interesting to get some feedback from the audience on that.
So we'll dig into it a bit more in the Q&A maybe at the end. I'm going to switch gears for a moment and talk to you, Randy, a little bit. So infrastructure guys have been ruining the lives of developers for years and years now, decades probably, right? Since
the beginning of time.
Is there anything, you infrastructure guys, and you spend most of your time in infrastructure, though I guess you're kind of DevOpsy now these days, anything you guys can actually do to help us out in this space?
Yes, of course. I mean, the thing that's interesting to me is that you saw kind of in the early days as infrastructure as a service got traction, a lot of focus on things like auto-scaling, auto-healing, auto-provisioning, and there was a lot of auto. And what it really amounted to was an attempt to try to make the cloud infrastructure, the baseline, smart enough to drive the app. And as we all know, at least I hope we all know, all apps scale differently. There are some big buckets, but they all basically scale differently. And infrastructure essentially needs to be relatively dumb, right? I mean, it's like having your road drive your car for you. You don't really want that. You want really good signage on the road, and then you're going to drive your car down the road and use all the information that the road provides you on how to drive your car or how to get from one destination to another. And so I think one of the big missing pieces here is that we really need to allow infrastructure as a service to have enough tooling to allow platforms to add in the auto magical bits, because it really doesn't belong in the infrastructure piece. So that's how can a platform provider actually get information about whether a particular virtual machine is on a physical node that's oversubscribed and it's losing CPU cycles or disk cycles or some other resource constraints are occurring so that it can move that around. It can do the workload adjustment. Why would you do the workload adjustment on the back end? I remember you telling me, Killian, once before actually at Credit Suisse that you would be using DRS, not trying to slam VMware, just giving an example. And there would be a little bit of thrashing where a VM would start to have resource constraints, and then it would get moved to another box where there would be resource constraints, and it would get moved to another box, and another box, and another box. Now, the infrastructure doesn't know anything about what's in that VM. It could be a mission-critical app. Don't ever move this. Move other things, right? And when you've got platform as a service that's got enough hooks into the infrastructure to do relatively intelligent things, it can be told what the policies are about running that application. And I think that's a lot of what's missing right now, and I think it's really important for us to build that tooling into the infrastructure layer so that platform providers can do the magical bits.
And this is about application topology. And if we look at infrastructure as a service as it mostly stands at the moment, it's about delivering a VM. It doesn't know about application topology at all. And if we look at platform as a service, it's actually about constrained application topology. So it's giving you a set of model application topologies that fit most common problems. And so you can build the most common solutions out of it. And I think the next level of sophistication becomes dealing with arbitrary application topologies in a meaningful way so that you can build specific applications to purpose and have that right relationship between the underlying infrastructure and the demands of the application. And we've been talking about this for years, that you ultimately end up with a service level agreement for what that application is delivering to the business, which is a very complex derivatives contract of the underlying compute and storage and network that's been allocated in the data center.
Bank guys always talk about derivatives in the end, don't they?
So when you look at Google or maybe an Amazon and sort of ask yourself, what are they doing that's different? The answer is that any given application inside of Google uses Google File System and Bigtable and MapReduce. They all use the same kind of horizontal service layers. And I'm sure you see this inside of Salesforce as well. Even though there's a multitude of different applications, they all use a bunch of different horizontal service layers. And when you look inside a typical enterprise, every single application is pretty much its own silo, top to bottom, sometimes even in terms of networking and storage. And there isn't that set of horizontal service layers which we need so badly in order to allow massive scale and self-service and to allow platforms to do very interesting things where they're not trying to manage each of those horizontal services. So that's another area that I think is really important.
I was going to say, actually, maybe one example of this is we think about the cloud in general and platform as a service as the next thing, and you may be thinking of cost reduction or that sort of motivation, but there's a lot of things that we hope to enable in the cloud that are just not possible if you don't do it in the cloud because of the sort of horizontal scaling. If you need 10,000 CPUs to do some interesting computation, that's going to be next to impossible to achieve if you're not running in the cloud. So I think beyond the cost reduction, the faster time to market, which are all very important reasons to consider a platform, I think you'll also see that you'll be able to do things that you just couldn't do before, and that's very exciting too, particularly around data analysis, for instance.
Jesper?
Yeah, I think if you look at Salesforce's experience in the cloud, we very much have been subjected to the business users' perception of performance, and we've had to live with that from day one. So that's now been built into our fabric. And that's resulted in our somewhat bespoke platform as a service that we started with because we took that and said, when developers build applications, we want to make sure that they can build an application that responds well to the business user and where the developer is not, like that's the sole focus is on delivering the application functionality. It's not in understanding how many resources do they need to allocate in order to get to a certain business user experience. And that's actually a very, very hard thing. And now that we're opening up and providing Java infrastructure with VM4s, we're going to have to look at that problem in different ways. And I think, maybe I'm going to have a hallway conversation here afterwards with Eric about Google App Engine and what they're seeing with users over there, because that thing has been out there a little longer. And I think there must be some interesting stories there about the developer. What do you need to give the developer and the administrator of the application, the technical administrator of the application, in order for them to understand what does it mean that I have these resources and then my application is behaving in a certain way, given that I have my own contract, my derivatives contract with the business user who are expecting a certain response time, no matter how many different crazy things they do.
Randy, just a quick last one. What bits of infrastructure, what do you think we should be watching?
What do you mean?
Is it new server technologies, network technologies? Is there particular things that PaaS guys care about, or is it just the whole change in infrastructure as a service?
So if you ask probably anybody in this room what's the dividing line between infrastructure and platform, you're going to get probably 20 different answers. What I think is really interesting is to look at kind of what Amazon's led with. And I don't know how many of you have been involved with cloud, but I've been in it almost since day one. And in the very early days of EC2, there was no load balancer, and people were screaming, "I need a load balancer!" And lo and behold, within 6 to 9 months, Amazon had load balancers. And if you kind of look at all the different things they built, queuing systems, load balancing services, on-demand block storage, now managed databases, that's kind of a hint that there's even though that interface between infrastructure and platform is ill-defined, right? There's a bunch of point solutions right above the simple storage, network and servers that people really need. And whether it's the platform folks or whether it's folks building applications directly on top of it, they are looking at ways to try to consume something like an XMPP service on demand that they can just plug into and get that service and have it scale, and they don't really want to know what's behind the curtain again. And so I think that, we looked at Amazon, that's a good example. You can look at where VMware is investing their money recently. I think there's some good indicators there of where things are going. Almost certainly, both of those folks are responding to what they're hearing from the customer base. That's
an interesting point, the movement of application services onto the infrastructure side of the line almost, right? In any case, at this point, you've heard enough questions from me, I suspect. So I just wanted to open it up to you lot and see if whoever's been insulting us on Twitter can stick their hand up and yeah, go for it.
I understand that there's a coding opportunity and coding leverage that you do, that the services, once they're defined, that's a leverage that you can take advantage of. If you're, like Gartner will say, simplify and standardize everything, you can. So given that we don't want to run many different platforms for every application usage or infrastructure, service provider over here, or pass provider over here, SaaS provider over here, blah, 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 is there anything that platform as a service offers to a already written application that is not to be recoded?
Is there?
I want to leave it deliberately open rather than categorize.
So to summarize our question, essentially, is platform as a service relevant to existing legacy apps? Thank you.
We talked a little bit earlier about adoption, and I was going to jump in and say I think adoption has to happen as an evolution. I guess my answer to you is there's not as much as you would like to be done. If you take an existing application that I know nothing about and I build a nice platform as a service and you come with your application and you want to deploy it on it, I think you would have to think about that as part of your strategy and as an investment you expect returns on, not as a zero cost thing you just do. But I don't think that's such a stretch. I think that is how we plan and how we operate in an IT environment. We create a plan for the next year and the following year, and we decide, what are we going to do with our existing assets? What are our next steps for them? And then I don't think it's it's so different, cost-wise or otherwise, to look at an existing application and say, I want to embark on a cloud strategy. I want to remove the burden on me for operating all these things, and I want to identify candidates that I have in my portfolio for moving to the cloud. So I think you have to look at it that way. So I don't expect you to be able to wholesale moving applications to the cloud without touching them, but I do think it fits with a normal pattern of IT planning and investment.
One thing that's gotten clearer and clearer to me recently is that if you assume that cloud computing sort of, displaces client-server or enterprise computing in the same way that displaced mainframe computing, not that many mainframe apps actually migrated. It was mostly new apps. And I don't know what the percentages are. I really have no idea. But you can see that IT spend on mainframes has not really ever gone down. It's kind of plateaued, and maybe it's got a nice little growth year over year. And I think we're mostly going to see a lot more cloudy apps in platform as a service. And, that's simply a function of ongoing needs to be more agile, to deliver more value, to deal with sort of the mobile universe of new smartphones and mobile devices like the iPads. A whole set of new applications that are driven by very different sort of adoption curves. So if you look at like Facebook apps or iPhone applications that get downloaded and then talk to some kind of cloud service, they'll have these very rapid, adoption and then kind of long tail off kind of curves. And so I think we'll see that driving cloud mostly. And in fact, that's what you see largely with EC2 today. And the reason that it's, over 500,000 virtual servers already.
Any more questions? Yep. Oh, time, I guess. 1 or 2 minutes? All right, so time for another question. Anybody? Go for it.
What do you see as a path to platform as a service successes? Has it been taking your core, your basic internal competencies of platforms and architectures and exposing them publicly and monetizing them? Or custom building a platform that's targeted to a developer community? And in the case of the former, how do you address the wants, the nice-to-haves from the developer community and integrate that back into your platform?
So what's the typical successful PaaS app? Ish? Okay.
So this is to us as builders of platform as a service, right? Okay, so I can talk to Google App Engine. Google App Engine is designed from the ground up to be an offering for developers and enterprises. So it's not something that we, had built for us and thought it'd be nice to expose it. It was designed for what the purpose it serves today. Now, it does, as you pointed out, it does leverage a bunch of our internal building blocks at the infrastructure level, like Bigtable, like a bunch of internal services. So, of course, we're using our investment both in terms of infrastructure and software that we've built Google around, but the product itself is entirely focused on its external customers.
I think part of the answer to this as well is about dealing with the paradox of choice. And whilst it's often great to have choice, and developers love to have choice, that takes time to figure out which of the choices you're going to make. And platform as a service is often about constraining the choice to a limited subset that's going to make sense for the majority. And it becomes one of those Pareto things of there are going to be applications that you probably want to lie outside because they need to make choices that aren't supported by the platform. But most of the stuff will actually fit in. And they can get going much quicker by not being faced by a wall of choice.
And as I think you said, I mean, a lot of the energy today is going in both building still some of the fundamental building blocks to make this work, like identity. And there's enormous energy going on right now in identity, a lot more than ever before. And some of this is expanding that percentage of apps that actually do fit well into the PaaS framework. And we're seeing, there a lot of great adoption. And I think with every single thing that each of us launches, you just carve out another piece of your total space of apps that actually now becomes a great target for a platform as a service.
Do you remember how Java was going to be the write once, run everywhere language? And, it was going to be you're partially responsible for that, Lou. And how we weren't ever going to need any more programming languages or frameworks of any kind. And actually, if you go and you look right now, there's just a continuing proliferation of languages and frameworks. Clojure, Lisp on the JVM. It is had a huge resurgence. And I just, if you look over time at, what people use as tools, I agree that, in the enterprise there's some tendency to lean towards certain dominant languages or frameworks, but even those evolve over time. And so when I think about platform as a service, I see it really starting to constrain to 3 or 4 major platform players. I think there's going to be a very large number of different kinds of platform as a service offerings that solve different kinds of problems for different languages and different frameworks and scale in different ways. And you will use them on your cloud, and you will tie them together with a service-oriented architecture. So you'll say, I've got a Java application that I need to load up over here, and it scales horizontally with no problems, and that needs to talk to this Python or Ruby application over here, which is a front-end portal in my extranet. And the ability to have all of that, to have that choice, in this case where it's all constrained, but there's a bevy of choices where you can use the right tool for the job, actually will make the agility within the business much greater and much faster. You can connect external platforms with internal platforms and, make it all go. And flying unicorns.
So I couldn't possibly end on a better note than that. So at this point, I'll draw to a close. Sorry, if you have questions, maybe grab us afterwards, but I think we have to go because there's a bunch of people waiting outside. Just one last point. Fill out your surveys and tell everybody how good we are and how nice you think we are and stuff like that. Thanks very much. Bye.